Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. In this video I'll show you how I did my nurgle wardogs and converted and painted them up. So here's a finished shot of them, done incredibly similar or very identical to how I've done my knights and things for Nurgle army. So this will be a little bit of a repeat if you've watched all those videos, although there are a couple of slightly different techniques used for like the melter guns and the exhaust ports and that kind of thing. So some differences. I thought I would first show just a little bit of the build process. Now, there is no conversion work on these models at all. These are basic standard wardogs. The conversion work comes afterwards with the green stuff in the paint job and stuff, not in the build process. So built absolutely as normally. Lovely models, wardogs, really nice big chunky kits, actually fairly quick to build. I think sometimes when you look at larger kits like this you think they'll be super complicated. They're not. These are actually relatively easy. Now the weird thing is they do come with two different weapon sets, and if you're buying for chaos, the strange thing is you have to buy an imperial one because they don't do a chaos version of the armigers, as they're called when you buy the imperial, which is a little bit strange, but I suppose there is a new chaos knight book coming out near the end of the year and things, so maybe that's when we'll see them, so we'll see. Doing the bases, I am doing these to match all of my chaos forces, or my nurgle army in particular, and so figures are built, you see here in standard poses, and it's working on the bases. You can see there I've got a Green Stuff World roller. I've done a video on how to use these separately, so I won't go into full details other than it's milliput, which is a two-part like epoxy putty. As I'm using the black one here because I normally buy the sort of pale sand coloured one. Black one is quite messy but works exactly the same way. So you use milliput, you spread this onto your base, and you use the roller to make the texture. You can get them in all sorts of texture format. I'm just using a cobblestone roller here, which I've used on all my nurgle bases, but I have used ones on my Sisters of Battle army. I've used them for Necromunda, various other pieces. So they are lovely bits of kit, well worth checking out. I'll drop some links down below for give you some ideas of where you can get them, and I'll put the link for the video of how to use them fully, although obviously if you're watching in the background you will see, because I've literally just done a few of the bases there. So it is fairly quick and easy and can be fairly clean and tidy if you've take your time and you do it properly. So what I'm doing is gluing them into the milliput before it's dried. So this milliput's probably about an hour old at this point. So just super glue on the feet, push it into the milliput. Sometimes the milliput will bubble up a little bit around the feet, so you just sort of press that back down because you don't want the cobbles to look, too squished. Now into the bases, I'm making kind of pools of nurgle gunk, and these are just balls of milliput and green stuff that I've made with any offcasts when I've been making other things, just rolled into a small ball. You can sometimes slice the bottom of it off and just dip that into the super glue that you've put onto the base. Try and use something, like a set of tweezers or something like that, so you're not getting your fingers covered in super glue and gluing your fingers to the base. Again, I've done a nurgle basing video, so you can check that out if you want to get a full picture of how to do those bases. Now this here is the start of the nurglization of the wardogs. So this is blue stuff, and in a previous video, I keep referring to previous videos, the Knight one video, converting the Knight, I used blue stuff from Green Stuff World to cast up pieces off a Glotkin model that I could then put green stuff in and put nurgly bits onto the armigers and the knights. So really this is about combining the effort of your build schemes, and if you're doing a nurgle knight army particularly, think ahead about all the pieces and things you're going to want to use. So I'll drop a link to that video, you can check it out how I made these. There are things you can do just with milliput and green stuff if you haven't got the capacity to cast. Now, the other thing to remember is you can cast off a painted model. So if you've got a friend or someone that's got the Glotkin model and you don't mind spending 10 minutes with him or her, just grab your blue stuff, take it to the house, whatever, boil it up, and you can take casts off a painted model and it won't knacker the paintwork up as long as that model is varnished. So just I suppose point that out. But I'm putting multiple pieces of this cast up green stuff, you can see there at various places, cut little pieces out that I like, super glue them onto the model, and then it's about battle damaging and things. So scouring off some imperial symbols, putting a chunk of the green stuff on to make the pustules where the symbols were. Some of it's just scouring a symbol off and not replacing it with anything. So I'm not going as mad with the green stuff parts on the wardogs as I did on the knights, but just putting a proportionate amount to show that these are, horrible things turn into nurgle. One of the personal favourites, pin drill, and just drilling in some larger bullet holes. So because the knights are going to get shot by larger weaponry, this is a larger drill bit that I'm using than I do use on smaller figures, and then really going around and just cutting little bits of armour panels off in little chunks. Nothing too drastic, there's no giant holes into the model, but just enough to make it look battered and thousands of years old. Smaller pin drill, to drill out the melter gun barrels. Now if you do watch my later videos, you will see I've actually replaced the melter guns on these with heavy stubbers, because I think I mentioned before, I am going to a tournament, so you have to be tournament legal and all that kind of stuff and keep under your points. Liquid green stuff, personal favourite from Games Workshop, great for filling in gaps, great for blending in these green stuff pieces. So because you've cut a millimetre of green stuff, it's going to stand quite proud of the armour panel, so you need to gradiate that in. Liquid green stuff is a great thing to do that with. You can do it with normal green stuff or mini put if you don't want to buy liquid green stuff and just smooth it on, but this is just a faster way. Base, a little bit of sand, play sand, it's a great thing. Nice and cheap, and for the purposes of this base it's enough. You can buy fancy, nicer base materials, but I'm okay with it for this particular base. So we've sprayed it black, we've then sprayed it a metal colour. Brilliant starting point. Now we're using some Games Workshop crackle paint. I will put all the paint links in the description down below so you can check that, follow it out, use the exact ones. Now the crackle paint would be a way of you doing a Nurgle Knight without having to do all the green stuffing and the moulding and those kind of pieces if you didn't want to do that. I use it to blend in the green stuff parts, and also use it on panels that I want to look a bit manky but not, fully kind of pushed to look and nurgly. That's a very basic paint scheme from here. Again, I'll put all the colours down below, but I'm just taking the same colours I've used for all my Death Guards so far and working them around this scheme. So we've started off with the Death Guard green, then we're using a nice brass colour for all the rims because it's meant to be an aged vehicle. Now any area where there's kind of the nurgly pustules and stuff, I'm just using a Rakarth flesh, a nice pallid flesh colour, and you can use that to sort of represent where these pustule-y things and nurgly bits are bursting out the armour. But what you can also do is the damaged bits of armour panel, you might want to show where it's starting to convert and mutate. You can use that flesh there. So if you see, I've done it in areas, actually in some parts it's going over the brass detailing, and that's that kind of demonic entity pressing out. So if you didn't want to use the green stuff pieces, you could just use the crackle paint and you could use the flesh colour to really represent how it's being nurgled up. Now I always use yellow for all the kind of pustules, the bits of nurgly flesh that could be coming through. Just a nice simple colour, quite vibrant, and works really well when you put nurgle's rot over it, which we will be doing in a minute. Some small detailing with sort of skulls and things, and picking out cables with just a black colour. Now I'm not going super overboard with the detail in these models. I think you can fall into the trap with a big model of thinking you've got to use 100 colours. Actually, sometimes simple is the best, it's more impactful, because what you want to focus on and draw the eye to is the demonic nurgle parts. And if you've got a raft of colours all over the model, it's just my opinion, I think it can really distract the eye and go too far. One pop of colour I'm doing now is on the chainsword arms, just a little bit of difference, to make them stand out from the shooting armigers. And then back around where some of this metal damage is, just that bit of silver, just to re-highlight it. Now when we do an ink wash in a minute, a lot of this will be dulled down, but I think because these have been impacts that have broken the surface of the armour, I just wanted to make sure that the metal was still showing. So you saw when I did the green stage, I was fairly quick with it, tried to avoid any areas that I didn't want painting green, but you'll always hit those kind of bullet holes, so worth going back over. Now this is the favourite game wash for me, so Vallejo Cpu Wash. Any sepia wash will do, any dirty wash, but whatever you use, make sure you use the same one for your entire army, and it really pulls the army together. Now I say this every time I do the ink wash, you could leave it at this stage, it would be absolutely fine, but you do find you will get some tide marks and things on the wash stage, and it's just worth going over that extra highlight. Now I've used a wet palette, so all the paints I've used are still on there, still perfectly fine. It's about now going over and effectively dry brushing or highlighting every single part of this armour. Now the green armour, I am just dry brushing it on. Really gentle stages just to get rid of those tide lines. I don't want to touch the cracks and the gaps where the wash is soaked in, and what you end up with is a nice 2 or 3 tone kind of green. Same with the metallics, you're not covering the whole thing, you're just putting some sort of edge highlights on. Again with the flesh, we're not trying to cover everything. Now when you redo the flesh, you will end up covering a lot of the yellow. That's fine, it just gives some nice tones as you're going. But what we're trying not to do is we're not painting this stage. So you'll see I'm using, it's a makeup brush. Actually going to experiment with some makeup brushes, but just using the dry brush just to kind of put some of the colour back on, and it gives you a nice 2-3 level effect. And what you find is for minimal effort, it makes it look like you've done 4 or 5 colours on your army, which is great. So same thing around all the others. So we're just putting again some more detail back on the skulls with the sort of bone colour. and then work through the army that way. I like this effect. It's not quite the grimdark effect. It's not quite the Games Workshop painting style. It's kind of somewhere in between, and something that I think works really, really well for Nurgle in particular, but I think any dirty kind of 40k, Necromunda, that kind of thing. So it's not my own particular style. A lot of people paint like this, but I just think it really works. A good balance of speed and effectiveness. You see they're just going back over things. You can have the pustules quite vibrant, so you don't need to worry about keeping them, because you're going to cover all the pustules and all the yellow bits in Nurgle's rot in a minute. So that's the one bit you can just paint that on and don't worry about covering the whole lot. Bases, again, there's a video on how I've done these. You can see how effective these rolls are at just giving you a nice effect onto a base, and I think they're fantastic. So when all that has dried, we're now just taking some contrast paints. Now contrast paints, people tend to use them and just slap them over the whole model. I think they're brilliant for doing kind of almost wash-based effects afterwards. So we're taking this contrast paint and all the areas where we've painted this pallid flesh colour, we're putting it on maybe a third to half of the areas, looking at the cracks. Where we've used that crackle paint that's in the top of the armour, we're just dropping it into some of those there, and this gives a nice bruised skin effect across the model. So contrast paints don't just have to be used to slap it over, and again you can see some areas just really dotting it on. Brass doesn't rust, so obviously we've used some rust style. When you look at the ink wash, brass oxidizes, so we're using kind of nihilakh oxide, another Games Workshop technical paint, being very sparing, not putting much on there at all, really focusing it on the nuts and the rivets and things, just to put sort of slightly extra pop of colour, because Nurgle, you want Nurgle to look rusty, manky, old. So a great little technical paint to do, and I really do appreciate Workshop's technical paints. So you can see on the base there, we haven't gone over the yellow on the base. We've just gone straight to that Nurgle's rot, and it works brilliantly. Now we're doing a really quick way of doing burnt melter effects and kind of burnt vents and pipes and things. We're using Druchii Violet, Drakenhof Nightshade and Nuln Oil. So the first ink you put down and cover 3/4 to maybe more than that of anywhere that you want burnt. Go around all your models, then before it's dried you then use Drakenhof Nightshade and put it on slightly less, and then you use Nuln Oil, and it gives a real nice burnt effect. And you can see back onto the original models, lovely burnt effect on the melter guns there. Here's the finished models. Going to tie in really nicely to my Knight and Nurgle army. Keep an eye on the channel, because I'll be coming back to this when I play the tournament. And again, this army is going to be expanded. Obviously we've done the Warhound Titan, we're going to do a Knight Asterius, lots of other things coming up. So check out Instagram and YouTube if you want to see more details of what I've done. There's 5 models shown here. I had to very frantically do a 6 for the tournament I'm going to, so keep an eye on that. Check all the links down below, and hopefully I will see you on another video.